The galaxy ignored humanity's warning, then the reckoning finally came. The room was enormous. It was not built for human beings. The ceilings were too high, the chairs were the wrong shape, and the air had a strange metallic smell that made Dale Harmon's eyes water every time he breathed in too deeply. He had been inside the galactic conclave chamber for 6 hours, and he had not eaten anything since the morning. His back hurt. His throat was dry. But he sat straight in his seat, because he knew that every alien in that room was watching him, and he was not going to give them anything to laugh about. Not yet, anyway. Dale was 44 years old. He had spent 20 of those years in the United Earth Expeditionary Fleet, rising slowly through the ranks the way a man does when he is good at his job but not particularly interested in playing politics. He had a square jaw, short brown hair going gray at the sides, and the kind of calm eyes that made people think he was either very relaxed or very dangerous. Most of the time it was both. He had been chosen for this assignment not because he was the highest-ranking officer Earth had, but because he was the one person the fleet's senior command trusted to sit in a room full of 47 alien species and not say something stupid. He was the first human officer ever given a seat at a full conclave session. That should have felt like an honor. It did not feel like an honor. It felt like being handed a microphone at a party where nobody wanted you there. The galactic conclave had been running for over 400 years. In that time, species had risen and fallen, wars had been fought and settled, and a long list of rules had been written about who could do what and where. Humanity had been a spacefaring civilization for only 60 years, which in galactic terms was nothing. Less than nothing. The older species looked at humans the way adults look at a small child who has just walked into a serious meeting, with mild irritation and the quiet hope that the child would sit down and be quiet. Dale had no intention of being quiet. He stood up when it was Earth's turn to speak. He pressed a button on the small device in front of him, and a holographic display rose above the center of the chamber. On it was a map of the galaxy, and on that map was a slow-moving shape, a spreading pattern of energy and structured signals that Earth's deep-range probe network had been tracking for 3 years. He spoke clearly and without rushing. He explained what the probes had found. He explained the structure inside the energy field, the way it moved in deliberate patterns, the way it responded to gravity wells, the way it had already passed through 2 regions of space that had previously held small, uninhabited planetary systems. Those systems were now empty. Not destroyed. Empty. The matter was still there. Everything else was gone. He told the conclave that this was not a natural phenomenon. He showed them the mathematical analysis that Earth scientists had run. He told them the anomaly was moving toward the core systems. At its current speed, it would arrive in 18 years. He asked them to take it seriously. The room was quiet for a moment after he finished. Then the Vreth delegate spoke. The Vreth were the oldest species in the conclave. They had been traveling between stars before humanity had invented the wheel. Their delegate, a tall gray-skinned creature named Aaven, had a voice that was smooth and slightly too loud, the kind of voice that was used to filling rooms. He looked at Dale's holographic display for a moment. Then he looked away, which was somehow worse than if he had argued. Aaven said that Earth's probe technology was well-meaning but immature. He said that the patterns Dale had identified were consistent with known natural phenomena that younger civilizations often misidentified due to limited sensor range. He said, with a small sound that every species in the room recognized as a laugh, that humanity's eagerness to contribute to conclave discussions was appreciated, but that perhaps more experience was needed before Earth could reliably interpret deep space data. A few other delegates made similar sounds. Dale stood there and listened to all of it. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He waited until Aaven was finished, and then he waited a few seconds more, and then he said, quietly, into the microphone, "We gave you the warning. Remember that we gave you the warning." He sat down. He cut his display feed. He folded his hands on the table and looked straight ahead. Nobody spoke to him for the rest of the session. The shuttle ride back to the Earth diplomatic vessel took 40 minutes. Dale spent most of it staring out the small window at the stars. He was not angry, exactly. He had expected this. He had read the reports about how human delegations were treated in conclave sessions. He had talked to the 2 diplomats who had attended previous meetings as observers. He knew exactly what the Vreth thought of humanity, and he knew that the Vreth's opinion was the one that mattered most in that room, because the Vreth had the most ships and the most history and the loudest voice. What he felt was something quieter than anger. It was a kind of certainty. The certainty that he was right, and that one day everyone in the chamber was going to know it, and that by then it might already be too late for some of them. He filed his report as soon as he was back on the vessel. It was long and detailed and included everything: the dismissal, the laugh, the exact words Aven had used, and his own assessment of how seriously the conclave intended to investigate the anomaly. His assessment was one word: not. The report reached Admiral Lena Corus at the United Earth Strategic Command facility in Colorado at 3 a.m, local time. She was already awake. She had been expecting it. She read it sitting at her desk with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and when she finished she sat very still for a moment and looked at the wall. Lena Corus was 53 years old. She had commanded 3 ships before moving into strategic planning, and she had a reputation for making decisions that other people thought were too big and too fast, and then being right about them. She was not a loud person. She did not inspire people with speeches. She inspired them by always knowing exactly what to do and doing it before anyone else had finished asking questions. She picked up her phone. She called the director of the Prometheus Defense Initiative, a program that had been running quietly for 14 years, funded through budget lines that most of Earth's civilian government did not look at closely. The program built ships. It developed weapons. It planned for the possibility that humanity would one day need to defend itself in a galaxy that did not take it seriously. The director answered on the second ring. Lena said, "Move the timeline up." Then she hung up, picked up her cold coffee, and drank it anyway. Outside her window, the Colorado night was clear and full of stars. She looked at them for a long time. Somewhere out there, past the edge of what any of them could see, something was moving. It was moving slowly, and it was moving with purpose, and it did not know yet that it was heading toward the one species in the galaxy that had been laughed at, dismissed, and ignored for 60 years. She thought that was probably going to be a problem. For the thing that was coming, not for Earth. She turned off the light and went back to work. The galaxy ignored humanity's warning. Then the reckoning finally came. 11 years passed without a single message from the Galactic Conclave to Earth. No invitation to observe sessions. No request for data. No acknowledgement that Dale Harmon had ever stood in that chamber and shown them what was coming. The silence was complete, and to most of the alien species in the conclave, it probably felt normal. Humanity was a junior species. Junior species did not expect to be kept in the loop. On Earth, nobody was sitting still. The shipyards ran day and night. Not the civilian yards that built cargo haulers and passenger vessels; those ran on their normal schedule, visible to any alien sensor array that cared to look. The yards that mattered were underground, inside mountains, and at 3 deep space stations positioned well outside Earth's normal traffic lanes. These yards built warships, and they built them according to plans that had taken 14 years to develop, refine, and make real. Admiral Lena Corus oversaw all of it from the Strategic Command Center in Colorado, working alongside Defense Secretary Owen Pratt, a quiet man from Ohio who had the unusual ability to make very large amounts of money disappear into budget lines that said things like infrastructure maintenance and long-range survey operations. Owen was not a military man. He was an administrator. But he understood better than almost anyone that a war which has not started yet is won or lost in the planning stage, and he made sure Earth planned well. The ships were unlike anything the Conclave had ever authorized a junior species to build. Their hulls were made from a layered composite material that Earth's materials scientists had spent 9 years developing. It absorbed directed energy and redistributed it through the structure rather than simply taking the hit. The drive systems were faster than anything the Conclave's own navies operated at the same ship size. And inside each one, in a shielded bay that took up nearly a quarter of the vessel's internal volume, was the weapon that Earth's physicists were most proud of and most careful about: the fracture drive. The fracture drive did not fire a projectile. It did not produce a beam. What it did was reach into the fabric of space around a target and collapse a small section of it inward, creating a gravity shear that tore matter apart at the most basic level. The effect was brief, intense, and left almost nothing behind. Earth's test program had run the weapon 94 times in deep space, always far from any conclave sensor range. It had worked 94 times. The battle doctrine for how to use all of it was written by a young officer from Portland named Gina Farrow. Gina was 29 years old when she wrote it. She had never been in a real battle. She had trained in simulations, studied every conflict humanity had records of, both human and alien, and she had a mind that was very good at seeing patterns in complicated systems. Her 300-page document covered everything: fleet formation, engagement sequencing, how to use the fracture drive in rolling pulses rather than single bursts, how to force an enemy to constantly adapt rather than settle into a response pattern. Senior officers twice her age read it and passed it around. A few of them argued with specific sections. None of them could find a better approach. Lena Corus read Gina's document in one sitting and then called her into the office the next morning. "You've never actually fought anyone," Lena said. "No," Gina said. "Does that bother you?" Gina thought about it for a moment. "It would bother me if I thought experience was the only way to understand how a fight works. I don't think that." Lena looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "Neither do I." She gave Gina a promotion that afternoon. In the 7th year after Dale Harmon's speech, 3 alien civilizations near the outer rim of the galaxy went silent. Not destroyed, silent. Their planets were still there. Their space stations were still there. But no signals came from them. No ships left or arrived. No distress calls. Nothing. The Galactic Conclave convened an emergency session. Several delegates were visibly frightened, which was unusual because most of them had lived long enough to think they had seen everything. The Vreth sent survey ships to the silent systems. The survey ships came back with no explanation. The worlds were intact, the buildings were standing, but every living thing was gone. The Conclave reviewed the data. It matched what Dale Harmon had shown them 11 years ago, almost exactly. Nobody said that out loud in the session. But everyone in the room was thinking it. A.A. Venn, the Vreth counselor who had laughed at Dale's presentation, sent a private message to Earth's diplomatic office. The message was polite. It used careful language. It said that the Vreth were interested in opening a new dialogue with Earth regarding recent deep space phenomena, and requested an urgent meeting at Earth's earliest convenience. Earth's diplomatic office sent back a single automated reply: Earth is currently reviewing its conclave commitments. We will respond at our earliest convenience. 3 weeks went by. No follow-up came from Earth. A.A. Venn sent another message. This one was slightly less polite and slightly more urgent. It mentioned the 3 lost civilizations. It mentioned that the Conclave's analysis of the anomaly was beginning to align with data Earth had presented more than a decade ago. It strongly implied that Earth's input would now be very welcome. Earth's diplomatic office sent the same automated reply. In year 12, 2 more civilizations vanished. The anomaly was now close enough that every species in the galaxy could detect it on their own equipment, with their own sensors. No one needed Earth's probe data anymore. They could all see it for themselves: the slow, steady, purposeful movement, the structured patterns inside the energy field, the way it consumed and left nothing living behind. The Conclave finally had a name for what was coming. They called it the Nullborn, an ancient machine consciousness from before the current age of the galaxy, dormant for longer than any civilization had existed, now awake and moving. Their oldest records mentioned it in the kind of language that old civilizations use for things they are afraid of and do not fully understand. The records offered no strategy for stopping it, because no one had ever stopped it before. In the 14th year, the Conclave sent a formal delegation to Earth. Not a message. Not a request through diplomatic channels. An actual delegation, representatives of all 47 member species, traveling in person on a convoy of ships that arrived at Geneva Station with their identification signals broadcasting on the open channel, so everyone could see them coming. They were not flying flags of war. They were flying flags of request. Dale Harmon watched the convoy dock from a window inside the station. He was 55 years old now. His hair was fully gray. He had spent the past 14 years doing various things, some of them classified, some of them routine fleet management, but mostly he had been watching. Watching the probe data come in. Watching the Conclave go silent, then panic, then slowly turn toward Earth the way a drowning person turns toward the one thing floating nearby. He had not felt satisfied when the 3 civilizations went silent. That had felt terrible, the way it always feels terrible when something bad happens that you warned people about and they did not listen. He had sat with that feeling for several days before he put it aside, because there was no room for it anymore. There was work to do. Lena Chorus met the delegation at the dock. She was 60 years old and wore her uniform without any ceremony about it. She looked at the assembled representatives of 47 alien species, some tall, some small, some with faces that no human would ever find easy to read, and she let the silence sit for a moment before she spoke. "Come inside," she said. "We have coffee. I assume none of you drink it, but we will have it anyway." She turned and walked into the station, and after a brief pause, every delegate followed her. Outside, through the wide station windows, the stars looked exactly the same as they always had. But somewhere among them, something old and vast and hungry was still moving. It had not slowed down. It did not know about the quiet years. It did not know what had been built in the dark while the galaxy was busy not listening. It was going to find out. The galaxy ignored humanity's warning, then the reckoning finally came. The elevator went down for a long time. The conclave delegates stood inside it in silence, which was unusual because most of them were species that filled silence with sound out of habit or social custom. But the elevator kept going down, and the silence kept going, and none of them said anything. They could feel the depth of it, the weight of the mountain above them, the sense that they were being taken somewhere that very few people outside of Earth had ever been allowed to go. When the doors opened, they stepped into the Prometheus Command Center, and most of them stopped walking. The room was enormous. Screens covered every wall, showing live feeds from shipyards, from deep space monitoring stations, from fleet positions scattered across Earth's territory. At the center of the room, a raised platform held the main tactical display, a full holographic map of the region between Earth and the Nullborn's current position, updated in real time. Officers moved between stations with the focused, unhurried energy of people who have been preparing for something for a very long time and are now simply doing their jobs. The delegates looked at all of it. Then they looked at each other. One of the Vreth aides leaned toward Aaven and said something in their own language. Aaven did not respond. He was staring at the main display, where small markers indicated ship positions, hundreds of them, each one representing a vessel that no conclave sensor had ever been allowed to scan. Lena Chorus let them look for exactly 2 minutes. Then she nodded to Dale Harmon, who was standing at the edge of the platform, and Dale stepped forward and began the briefing. He walked the delegation through everything. He did it in order, starting with the ships. Over 400 warships, he told them, the smallest of which was larger than the largest vessel the Vreth Navy currently operated. He explained the hull composite without giving them the full formula, because some information was not part of the agreement yet. He explained the drive systems. He showed them performance data from test runs that the Conclave had never known about. Then he showed them the fracture drive. He ran the simulation slowly, so every delegate could follow it. He showed them what the weapon did to matter at close range, at medium range, at distance. He showed them the test footage, empty space, a target drone, and then a gravity shear that erased the drone so completely that the sensors could not find debris. He showed them Gina Farrow's doctrine, summarized on a single screen, and explained how the weapon was meant to be used not as a single hammer but as a constantly moving, constantly adapting pressure that would force any enemy into a reactive position and keep it there. The room was very quiet when he finished. Gina Farrow was standing at the back of the briefing area. She was 36 years old. She was wearing a uniform that still had the creases from the morning's ironing because she ironed her uniform every morning without fail. She watched the delegates absorb what Dale had just shown them, and she read their faces the way she always read everything, looking for the pattern underneath the surface reaction. What she saw was fear. Not of the Nullborn, not in that moment. Fear of the humans in the room. One of the smaller delegates, a species called the Ivan, blue-skinned and no taller than a human child, raised a thin arm and asked how long this program had been running. 14 years, Dale said. The delegate processed that. You began building this before the first civilizations went silent. Yes. Before any of us had confirmed the Nullborn was real. Yes. Why? Dale looked at the delegate without any particular expression. Because we warned you, and you did not listen. We decided it was better to be ready than to be right. Nobody in the room had anything to say to that. Lena Chorus stepped forward then. She was carrying a single document, a physical one, printed on paper, which she had chosen deliberately because physical documents were harder to misplace or deny later. She set it on the table in front of the delegation. She explained the terms. Earth would deploy its fleet against the Nullborn. Earth would do the fighting, because the Conclave ships were not fast enough or durable enough to survive the engagement doctrine that Gina Farrow had written. The Conclave's remaining fleets would form a perimeter and handle civilian evacuation from the systems in the Nullborn's projected path. In exchange, the Conclave would agree to a complete renegotiation of humanity's status. Permanent senior membership. Full access to alien technology archives going back to the Conclave's founding. And one more thing, a formal clause, written into Conclave law and read into the official record, acknowledging that Earth's warning in 2189 was valid, was backed by accurate data, and was dismissed without cause. That last clause was the one that mattered most to Lena. Not for pride, she was well past the age of needing the galaxy to say sorry. It mattered because it needed to be on record, officially and permanently, so that the next time a junior species stood up in the conclave chamber and said something nobody wanted to hear, the delegates in that room would have to look at that clause before they decided to laugh. Then started to speak. He had clearly prepared something, an objection, or a counteroffer, or at minimum a way of making the terms feel more like a negotiation and less like a surrender. He got 3 words out before Lena cut him off. She did not raise her voice. She did not move toward him. She simply said, in the same calm tone she had used for everything, "You have no ships that can stop this." "We do. You have 2 options, sign the agreement, or watch the galaxy burn and know that humanity offered you a way out. Either outcome is acceptable to us." There was a long silence. Then Ven picked up the pen, a human pen, because the document was printed on human paper, and he signed it. The other delegates signed after him, one by one, in the order they were seated. Lena took the document back, folded it, and put it in her jacket pocket. After that the tone in the room changed. It became practical, the way rooms always do when the hard decision is behind you and the work is ahead. Gina Farrow moved to the front of the briefing area and began distributing the simplified version of her doctrine, the parts the conclave fleets needed in order to handle the evacuation properly. She answered questions for 3 hours. She was patient and clear and did not make anyone feel bad for not already knowing what she knew, because she understood that making people feel bad was a waste of time when there was a war to prepare for. Dale Harmon spent the afternoon with the Conclave's senior military advisors, walking them through the timeline. The Nullborn would reach inhabited space in 4 years. Earth's fleet needed 2 of those years for final preparation and positioning. The advisors asked many questions. Dale answered all of them. Late in the evening, after the delegates had been taken to their quarters in the station above the mountain, Dale stood alone on the briefing platform and looked at the holographic map. The Nullborn's position was marked with a slow-moving shape at the edge of the display. He watched it for a while. He thought about the session in 2189. The metallic smell of the air. The wrong-shaped chairs. Ven's laugh. He thought about standing up and saying the thing nobody wanted to hear, and sitting back down again, and knowing with complete certainty, that he was right and it would not matter. It had mattered. It had just taken a long time to matter in a way that anyone else could see. He named his flagship the next morning. He filed the registration paperwork himself, which admirals did not usually do, but he wanted to write the name with his own hand. He wrote, "Patience." Then he went back to work, #the galaxy ignored humanity's warning, then the reckoning finally came. The Nullborn did not arrive like an army. It arrived like a tide. The first thing the long-range sensors picked up was the light, not natural light, but a deep blue-white glow that spread across a wide front, moving steadily inward from the galactic rim. Behind the glow came the shapes. They were angular and vast, each one several miles across, and they moved in perfect unison the way parts of a single machine move, because that is what they were. The Nullborn was not a fleet. It was one thing, spread across thousands of bodies, all of them connected, all of them thinking the same thought at the same time. It had no weapons, in the traditional sense. What it had was worse. It reached into the systems it entered and simply took everything that was alive. No burning. No explosions. No debris fields. Just absence, the same clean, total absence that had been left behind in 5 civilizations across the past 11 years. Dale Harmon watched the Nullborn's leading edge on the display of the patients and felt the same thing he always felt at the start of something difficult, a very deep, very calm stillness. Not peace, something harder than peace. A kind of locked-in focus that pushed everything else to the edges of his awareness and left only the problem in the center. All ships confirm battle-ready status, he said. The responses came back in sequence. 412 vessels, every one of them confirming. Every one of them crewed by people who had trained for this for years, people who had run the simulations hundreds of times, who had memorized Gina Farrow's doctrine the way other people memorized the words to songs, who had gotten up every morning knowing this day was coming and had gotten up anyway. Gina was standing at Dale's right side, running her own tactical display. She had a console she had designed and built herself, lighter than the standard issue, configured the way her mind worked rather than the way the standard manual assumed minds worked. She was watching the Nullborn's movement pattern and already updating her sequencing calculations. They are not spreading wide, she said. They are moving in a concentrated front. That matches the third simulation model. Then we use the third doctrine, Dale said. Yes, Gina said. She was already sending the updated sequencing to the fleet. The choice of battlefield was not an accident. Dale had selected a debris field in a dead system called Vethmar 3 years before the battle, during the planning phase. The system had been empty for millions of years, no planets, just the scattered remains of a star that had collapsed long ago. The debris field was thick enough to scatter sensor signals, which meant the Nullborn's ability to track the human fleet would be partially degraded. The gravity signatures of the debris would also mask the approach vectors of Earth's ships as they moved into position. The Nullborn entered the debris field 6 hours after Dale's fleet had finished positioning. The first fracture drive pulse fired at 0412 hours, ship time. It came from a destroyer on the northern edge of the fleet, a ship called the Resolve, commanded by a calm lieutenant commander from Georgia named Paul Decker. The pulse hit the leading edge of the Nullborn formation and collapsed a section of space around 3 of the larger constructs. The gravity shear tore them apart in less than 2 seconds. The debris they left behind was not the clean absence the Nullborn usually left, it was real debris, glowing and scattered, drifting through the field. The Nullborn reacted. Not with panic, it did not seem capable of panic, but with a kind of slow, massive adjustment, the way a very large body of water adjusts when something is thrown into it. The constructs at the front edge began to spread, trying to reduce the density of their formation and make the fracture drive's concentrated effect less efficient. They are adapting, Gina said. She did not sound surprised. Adjusting pulse intervals and switching to formation Delta 3. The fleet shifted. It was not a fast movement, but it was precise, each ship moving to a new position that Gina had already calculated and filed as a contingency. The fracture drive pulses began coming from different ships in a rolling sequence, never the same source twice in a row, never the same interval between pulses. The Nullborn kept adjusting. Every adjustment exposed something, a gap in their formation, a concentration of energy in a predictable location, a movement pattern that repeated itself after enough pressure. Every exposure was logged by the fleet's shared data system and fed back into the firing solutions in real time. The first 3 days of the battle were like this. A long, grinding, methodical pressure. Earth lost 11 ships in those 3 days, not destroyed completely, but damaged enough to pull back from the engagement line. Nobody died in those ships, because every one of them had been built with redundant emergency sealing systems and enough life support reserve to survive a controlled retreat. The crews sealed the damaged sections and kept working from the sections that were intact. On day 4, the Nullborn changed direction. It was a sudden shift, the kind of movement that in a living creature you might call instinct. 2 large concentrations of Nullborn constructs broke away from the main body and began moving around the flanks of the engagement, converging on the position of the patients from 2 sides at once. It was a pincer, old as warfare, simple, effective, and very fast given how large the constructs were. Captain Nora Klein saw it first. Nora commanded the destroyer Tenacity, positioned on the eastern flank. She was 34 years old, originally from Phoenix, and she had a habit of making decisions 3 seconds before anyone else in the room had finished processing the situation. She saw the 2 Nullborn concentrations begin to move. She ran the calculation in her head in the time it took most people to recognize what was happening. The patience would be caught between them before the fleet could reposition. She did not ask permission. She pushed her ship to full speed directly into the gap between the two converging concentrations and fired the fracture drive at point-blank range. At point-blank range, the fracture drive was not a precise weapon. The gravity shear it created was wide and violent and did not discriminate much between the target and everything around the target. Both null-born concentrations were destroyed. The Tenacity's porthole was torn open across 60 meters of its length, venting atmosphere instantly. Nora's damage control officer reported the breach in a voice that was only slightly tighter than normal. Nora said, "Seal it. Emergency Protocol 3. All crew in affected sections into suits now." They sealed it. In vacuum suits, working in sections of the ship that had no air, her crew continued to operate the Tenacity for the next 6 days. They ate from suit reserves. They slept in shifts while still in suits. Nobody asked to pull back. Nora did not offer. Day 7 brought something none of them had expected. The nullborn stopped. Not in defeat, it still had many more constructs than Earth had destroyed. It simply stopped moving and held its position across a wide front. Then it sent a signal. The signal was not directed at any ship in particular. It broadcast outward in all directions, the way a person shouts into a room when they do not know exactly where the other person is standing. Earth's translation systems received it and worked on it for 11 hours. When the translation came through, Dale Harmon read it on his screen twice before he said anything. The message was 3 words, "What are you?" Dale thought about it for a moment. He thought about the conclave chamber in 2189. He thought about the wrong-shaped chairs and the metallic smell and Aven's laugh. He thought about 14 years of shipyards running in the dark and Gina Farrow ironing her uniform every morning and Nora Klein and her crew breathing recycled air out of suit reserves because they had decided to stay in the fight. He recorded his response personally. He spoke into the comm unit in his own voice, without any prepared script, and he said, "We are the ones you should have checked on before you started." He transmitted it. He waited to see if there would be a reply. There was no reply. The nullborn resumed movement. The battle lasted 2 more days. Earth did not lose any more ships, not because the fighting was easy, but because Gina's doctrine had been designed for exactly this kind of sustained, grinding engagement, and by day 7 every crew in the fleet had learned the rhythm of it the way you learn the rhythm of any hard work. They were tired. They were running on reduced sleep and recycled air and the specific kind of focus that comes when you are too busy to be afraid. On day 9, the last nullborn construct dissolved at the edge of the Andara system. The process took about 40 minutes, a slow, structural failure that spread through the construct the way cracks spread through ice. What was left behind was a debris field 6,000 miles wide that glowed faintly blue, the color of collapsed space slowly returning to its normal state. Gina Farrow watched it on her display for a long time. The battle data was still streaming in from every ship in the fleet, damage reports, crew status, fuel consumption, weapons load remaining. She processed all of it at the edge of her attention while the main part of her mind watched the glowing debris field. Then she turned to her console and opened the battle record log. She typed, "Engagement concluded. Outcome, victory." She thought about it for a second. Then she said out loud, to nobody in particular, "Log it as a win." Dale Harmon, standing 3 feet away, heard her. He did not smile, exactly. But something in his face changed, relaxed, just slightly, for the first time in 9 days. "Logged," he said, "The galaxy ignored humanity's warning, then the reckoning finally came." The galaxy was quiet. It was not the quiet of peace, exactly. Peace implies that something difficult has been resolved and everyone is ready to move forward. This was a different kind of quiet. The kind that comes after a very large sound, when the air is still settling and nobody is entirely sure it is safe to speak at full volume yet. 5 civilizations were still gone. Their worlds were still empty. The nullborn was destroyed, but the absence it had left behind was not the kind of thing that fills back in quickly. Earth's fleet returned home over a period of 3 weeks. The ships came back in groups, first the most damaged ones, which needed the longest time in dry dock, and then the rest in the order that made the most logistical sense. Nora Klein brought the Tenacity back near the end, because she had insisted on staying in the region until every other ship in her squadron had confirmed safe return. Her crew, still wearing the faded marks of days spent in vacuum suits, stood at the docking ramp and blinked in the normal light of Geneva Station like people who had been underground for a long time. Nobody made speeches. Earth was not a species that made many speeches after hard things. They wrote reports, filed records, ran maintenance checks, and then went back to work or went home, depending on what needed doing. Dale Harmon went home. He drove a rented car from the airport in Billings to his parents' old house in Bozeman, Montana, a 2-story building on a quiet street with a porch that faced west. His parents had both been gone for years. He still owned the house. He had not lived in it for a long time, but he had never been able to sell it, and now, sitting in the rental car in the driveway, he was glad he hadn't. He went inside, made sure the heat was working, and sat on the porch. He sat there for 3 days. His neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Carol Vance, brought him food both days without asking any questions. On the first day she brought soup. On the second day she brought a casserole. On the third day she brought a plate of sandwiches and sat in the other porch chair for about an hour, looking at the street, not saying much. Dale appreciated that more than he could easily explain. She had known him since he was 12 years old, and she had always understood that some things needed to be sat with rather than talked about. On the fourth day, he got up, packed his bag, and went back to work. The Galactic Conclave held its first full post-war session 6 weeks after the last engagement. It was held at Geneva Station, not at the Conclave's own facility, which was the first time in 400 years that the session had been held anywhere other than the Conclave chamber. Nobody had proposed the change formally, it had simply been understood by everyone involved that this session was going to be on humanity's terms, in humanity's space, and that pretending otherwise would be insulting to the intelligence of everyone in the room. Admiral Lena Corus sat at the head of the council table. She was 62 years old. She had officially retired from active command 2 weeks earlier, and she was wearing civilian clothes instead of her uniform, which surprised some of the delegates. She did not feel the need to explain the choice. She was there to do something specific, and she did not need a uniform to do it. She opened the session by reading the acknowledgement clause into the official conclave record. She read it in her own voice, clearly and without hurrying, and she did not add anything to it and did not leave anything out. The clause stated, in plain language, that Earth's warning in 2189 was accurate and was backed by valid data, that it was dismissed by the conclave without adequate review, and that this dismissal had contributed to the loss of 5 civilizations and a number of lives that no one had been able to count yet. When she finished reading, the room was silent. A.A. Van of the Vreth sat in his place and looked at the table. He had prepared a statement, something measured and carefully worded that acknowledged the clause without leaning into it too much. He had worked on it for 3 days. He did not deliver it. The moment had made the statement feel wrong in a way he could not fix with better wording, so he said nothing, and the silence continued, and eventually the session moved forward. The practical matters of the new agreement took most of the day. Technology archive access. Territorial adjustments. The structure of humanity's senior membership and what it meant for decision-making processes going forward. Owen Pratt, Earth's Defense Secretary, handled most of the negotiation from the human side. He was patient and specific and did not accept vague commitments in place of concrete ones, which was something the older species had relied on in negotiations with junior civilizations for a very long time. It did not work on Owen. He had been reading conclave negotiation transcripts for 15 years, and he knew every way a specific promise could be made to sound like something it was not. By the end of the day, everything was signed. Earth walked out of the session with everything it had asked for. Gina Farrow's promotion ceremony was held 2 weeks later at a facility in Colorado Springs, not the underground command center, but a regular auditorium with regular lighting and chairs that were the right size for human beings. It was a small ceremony. Gina had specifically asked for small, which the organizing team had tried to talk her out of and then accepted when it became clear she was not going to change her mind. She gave a short speech. She did not talk about the battle, or the fracture drive, or the 9 days of fighting in the debris field of Vethmar. She talked about Dale Harmon in a conclave chamber in 2189, standing in front of 47 alien species who did not want to listen, and giving the warning anyway. That, she said, is the most important thing a human being has ever done off this planet. Not the fighting. Not the ships we built or the weapons we developed. The warning. Because we told them. We gave them every chance. We stood up in a room where we were the smallest and the newest and the least respected, and we told them the truth, and then when they laughed at us, we went home and we got ready. Both of those things matter. But the first one matters most." She paused. She looked at the small audience, mostly officers and engineers and scientists who had been part of the Prometheus initiative from the early years. People who had done the work in the dark when no one outside Earth knew anything about it. "The galaxy is going to remember that we warned them," she said. "We are going to make sure they remember it. And the next time a species stands up in the conclave chamber with data that nobody wants to hear, maybe somebody will think twice before they laugh." She stepped back from the podium. The applause was not loud, because it was a small room and there were not many people, but it lasted a long time. Nora Klein received the first conclave-issued Medal of Valor ever awarded to a human being. The medal ceremony took place in the same auditorium the following day. 3 conclave delegates were present to make the presentation, and they had not agreed in advance on the exact protocol: who should hold the medal, who should speak first, how close to stand, so the presentation had a somewhat improvised quality to it that Nora found genuinely funny. She accepted the medal from all 3 of them in turns, shook their hands or the nearest equivalent of hands that each one had, and asked, in a perfectly normal tone, whether there was food at the reception. There was food at the reception. It was all human food, because the catering team had assumed that since the event was on Geneva Station, the conclave delegates would simply adapt. Most of them did adapt, some better than others. One of the Ivan delegates, the small blue-skinned species that had been among the most attentive during the briefing in Colorado, tried 3 different things from the table and seemed to genuinely enjoy 2 of them. Nora spent most of the reception talking to her crew, who were also there and who had eaten approximately twice as much as everyone else in the room, which felt right. The 5 lost civilizations were not recovered. Earth's research division began the long work of studying the empty worlds, not to reverse what had happened, because that seemed impossible, but to understand it. To find out what the Nullborn had taken those billions of lives for, and where it had put them, and whether any answer to those questions could ever be found. The lead researcher on the project estimated it would take at least 3 generations of work before they had anything close to a real answer. She filed the project plan and began hiring. 6 months after the battle, the Deep-Range Probe Network at the far edge of the galaxy detected something new. A faint signal, structured, moving with clear purpose. It was not in the same region where the Nullborn had originated. It was somewhere else, a different direction, farther out, at the very limit of what Earth's probes could detect. The report was flagged and sent up the chain with a priority marker. It reached Gina Farrow's desk at 0600 on a Tuesday morning. She was already at her desk because she was always at her desk at 0600. She read the report twice. She set it down on the surface of the desk and looked at the wall for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee, which was still hot because she had just made it. She pulled up her planning interface. She opened a new document and typed a title at the top. Then she began to plan. Outside her window, the sky over Colorado was turning from dark to pale blue, the way it does in the early morning when the light is still deciding what it wants to be. The stars were fading. But they were still there, past the light, all of them, vast and old and full of things that the galaxy had not yet found a way to warn anyone about. Earth was paying attention. Earth was always paying attention.